Hi, welcome to the Spring Cartouche Flourish. I'm really happy to show you this pointed pen technique. I get a lot of questions about what a cartouche actually is, so I pulled this book off my bookshelf. It is just a Dover publication. It's edited by Edmund Gillen. And inside, there's a lot of frames and ornamental designs. And traditionally, a cartouche was an area that was decorated. It was usually left blank for a name, and then the area around was a decorative ornamental work. So frames could count. These sort of designs, these opulent flourish designs, are often called cartouches. So that's the context that I'm going to be speaking from when I do this demonstration for you. I'm just going to flip a couple pages so you get a little bit of an idea of the decorative kind of scrolling work that is indicative of a cartouche. So that's where we're going to start. And when I translate it into the pointed pen, it takes on a little bit of a different format. So underneath, I've got some work here of my own. And this is just a little bleed-proof white cartouche done on some gray cardstock. I've got a simple floral inside. And this is my definition and my take on an ornamental cartouche. A little bit more of an expanded cartouche where I've just expanded the area inside where the florals are to create a little bit more of a wider area to flourish around. Corner. So this corner flourish, just a little stacking of flowers, and then these designs here, that little flourish with the pointed pen is what defines the cartouche in this particular piece. The cartouche actually frames the heart here. You can see the cartouche is embedded in the work and a couple little clusters of flowers. Flowers are really good vehicles for carrying color around a design. This is a little bit of a longer design. So again, you've got those cartouche, those kind of built up pointed pen strokes and a little bit of a border expanded off the end of that flourish there. And then again, the flowers around the outside carrying the color and sort of balancing the design. A little bit here, again, sort of that implied heart shape around a little bit of a calligraphic quote. And the flourish can be as ornate as you want. You can start very simply and build up these designs. So I'm just going to show you a couple of beginning strokes and then we'll get right down to work. All right, I am going to use a straight pen holder and a medium flexible nib. This is a Hunt 21 nib. This is a vintage nib and it's kind of hard to find, but a modern equivalent would be a Hunt 22. So nothing too flexible, but also nothing too rigid. I'm going to practice on this Marrow-Man Memnosine paper. This is a really smooth practice paper. I really recommend using a high quality paper even for practice. And the ink that I'm going to be using is McCaffrey Penman's Brown. This is kind of my signature ink that I love to use. Really nice fluid for the pointed pen. Always work off the pad. So I've actually removed some papers from the pad, and generally speaking, when I'm doing pointed pen work, I go through a big warm-up of kind of getting my hands ready to work. So a warm-up is usually my usual practice, but we don't have a lot of time in this particular presentation to do that. So we're going to start in with a few practice strokes. Okay. So when I'm doing a cartouche, it's based on this compound curve. I start with no pressure. I have a gradual increase of pressure, and then I end with no pressure. And it's this kind of slender shape that we're looking for as we build up our designs. So again, I'm going to start with no pressure, add a little bit of pressure, and release. And if you look at the stroke, it is based on an elliptical oval. So I've got an implied oval at the top, I've got an implied oval at the bottom, and the entire shape is based on this elliptical oval. When I create these designs, I start to not only look at the ink itself, there's my ink line, I'm also looking at the white space, so I leave a little bit of a gap, and I'm going to create a stroke in harmony with this first stroke. I'm going to drop down, secondary stroke, cross right through, and I'm going to end with just a little bit of pressure on that exit stroke. So not only do I have two ink strokes, I also have negative space in between the ink strokes. I could simply add another little decorative line on either side, and a little finishing detail is to add these little backward C strokes at the top, and it gives the impression that this cartouche is contained and kind of all converging on a central point. This is a key point in making a slender and concise flourish. So you not only want to create the ink strokes, you want to be aware of the negative space. That is a rapid intro to how I actually create the structure of the cartouche. Accent strokes or secondary strokes or little delicate embellishments are as precise as the stroke itself. So if I'm going to do a wheat flourish, I would start with a lead-in stroke, add a little pressure, and pull down. A lead-in stroke, pressure, and pull down. Do you notice everything has a precision to it? I'm not just throwing ink on paper. I am really being deliberate and mindful of creating a delicate and precise stroke, because these are going to augment the cartouche itself. So quite simply, a stroke that I like to do is a wheat flourish, where I just start with a little bit of a lead-in, and notice this is gracefully curved, and I'm just going to start to taper down this little line with these little wheat kernels. And I've created this really delicate flourish stroke, and you notice that even the ending, I don't end abruptly. I do a little flourish and a little curve at the end of the stroke. You can vary these wheat strokes by, rather than going all down one side, you can alternate. And suddenly I've opened up that negative space a little bit. It's a little bit more airy. I could make much more long and linear strokes. So it looks a little bit more like wisteria if you do it like this. Again, nothing is ended abruptly. Everything has sort of a graceful curve to it. Another simple stroke would be a little leaf. And leaves, or anything open that you draw with the pointed pen, can carry color throughout your design. So here I go, just drawing a little spray of leaves. They can have one leaf, two, three. There's no real rule about that. You don't have to stick to odd numbers. I often do, but you don't have to. There's really no hard and fast rules here, other than when you have strokes intersecting each other, try and make sure that only a hairline crosses through another hairline. Hairline can even cross through a shaded stroke if necessary. You just don't want to have two shaded strokes crossing through each other. All right, one more little stroke is a little rosebud. So I'm going to start with a lead in. And rather than that leaf shape, I'm just going to make a very skinny, elongated shape similar to the leaf and a backward C. And that's going to create my rosebud. That will make a lot more sense when I go over to the good paper and start to flourish for you. A couple little leaves attached and maybe a wheat stroke or two. And finally, the little floral itself. I can start with just this little circle center, come around the outer edge with these little petal shapes. They're sort of a lazy heart shape. And they're not botanical illustrations. Sometimes they'll have 4 petals, sometimes 5, sometimes 6, but you are giving the general impression of creating a floral. You're not creating a botanical element that's precise. You're just stylizing this floral. Couple little leaves. And what if I want a bud just extending from that floral? And again, you can do that little pressure and release stroke, and suddenly you've created this little floral motif. And by way of introduction, that's going to lead us into the little project we're going to do. All right, so I am set up for my demo. I have a little bit of gray cardstock just cut to 5x7. I've also got an extra scrap of that to test out some of the strokes before I go to my good paper. I've got a few colored pencils, so I've got 2 shades of pink, 2 shades of green, a Sakura Jelly Roll pen, and the color is Clear Stardust. Got a little bit of Schminke gold watercolor that I've added a drop of distilled water to kind of soften a little bit, and a mixing brush for that. I've got a mixing brush and a little bit of water for my bleed proof white, as well as this 2-jar setup for bleed proof white. Normally for bleed proof white, I add a few drops of distilled water into a working bottle and then have a rinse container ready for cleaning my brush. So I try not to contaminate my rinse water too much. That's there as an extra precaution, as well as just a little tissue just in case I need to clean up a little bit. But that's pretty much the setup, all we need. Bleed Proof White is a wonderful white ink to use for these projects. So that's all you need to begin with. Now, one thing to keep in mind as I do this demo is there's actually a lot of paper movement when I do these flourishes, and even if you're following along with me, you'll not be able to follow me stroke by stroke. These offhand flourishes are very peaceful and meditative and calming, and you sort of get into this flow state where these flourishes just sort of build without you being overly conscious of stroke by stroke. It's a very meditative and peaceful technique. I'm just checking out the consistency of my bleed proof white. It does seem a little bit watery. And if you shake it off a couple times, you can see that a drop or two flows off. And I'm just going to test it and see what a stroke looks like. Not bad. All right, here we go. Let's give it a go. I'm just going to start in the center with this simple little floral. Little circle and these lazy heart-shaped petals. I'm just etching in a few little directional shade lines that lightly follow the shape of the petal. And it starts to establish a little floral here. I can tuck another one very close by. And this technique I'm using is called clustering. And when you cluster a flower, you generally start one floral next to another and make them interfere with each other a little bit without drawing through the previous flower. And that creates a sweet little cluster which can serve as the central focus of our little flourish. I tuck in a leaf or two, and I'm just creating out of thin air. This is the process of true offhand flourishing, where there's no pencil marks, there's no orientation marks. You're just going to go and see what's going to happen. And all I know is it's going to be a spring floral cartouche. Okay, here I go. I'm repositioning the paper. Most of the strokes when I'm doing offhand flourishing, I pull toward my body. So I'm going to start with that. compound curve, secondary stroke, and I'm just starting to build up strokes around that cartouche. I'm turning the paper and I'm going to do the same thing on the other side, although they're not going to be identical. When I create these designs, I just start to play and I let these designs evolve. So I'm just going to have a go. I'm probably going to quiet down and you can just observe and watch how the flourish evolves. One of the things I encourage my students to do is to let go of overly analytical thought at this point. You can notice how many times I'm turning the paper, and every time I turn the paper, I'm switching my view. And as I switch my view, I'm also switching the judgment that I have of this flourish. And in a way, it's a very freeing way to develop your calligraphic skills. You are not overly critical like you are of a letter form where everything has to be perfect. This is more of a natural, organic design that it is what it is, if that makes any sense. And you have this sense of letting go. I have a lot of students that are very analytical and they consider themselves to be perfectionists. And sometimes the process of offhand flourishing can prove to be a little bit difficult for a real perfectionist. So I just encourage you to play and let these happen and let these evolve. You notice how many times I actually turn the paper and I'm just scanning my eyes over the whole thing as I do these strokes. This is just a little zipper stroke here where I'm just lightly flowing the pen over top of some of these random marks I've placed on the paper. And usually I embed a little signature. And right there, I'm going to just take another little peek, make sure it looks visually balanced to me, and then I'm going to get ready to go into color. One of the hardest things with offhand flourishing is actually stopping. So I'm going to just control myself and stop at this point and pull into some color here. All right, time for color. And in these florals, I am just coloring right over top of that bleed-proof white. It is dry, so no worries there. You notice how the bleed-proof white cuts kind of right through the color itself. And I'm usually going to begin my coloring with the darker tone of the floral. And I'm just going around that central portion, coloring in that darker tone. I think I've got just about everything. There we go. And now I'm going to color over with the lighter tone, and I'm going to blend it right to the edge of each of those petals. And you're starting to get this stained glass effect and sense of depth. Not a lot of contrast between these two pinks, but whatever colors you choose, normally you put the darker color near the base of the petal or base of that center. Okay, we're going to just pop through. Here we go. I think I got it. Another little technique you can do is just decide near the end of each of those wheat flourishes, you're going to just tip in with a little bit of color. It could have been your green, it could have been your pink, anything you want, but you're visually adding more weight throughout this flourish by doing that. Now I'm going to grab the greens, and the same deal, that darker tone goes near the base of the leaf. Oops, a little bit too much pressure and I snapped the tip of the pencil. It's okay, keep going. I think we're getting there. Adding a little bit of that green leaf. Oops, I always forget one or two. There we go, another one. All right, so now with the lighter tone, I'm just sort of burnishing right over top, and you're getting that beautiful glow of color. And the transformation that happens when you start to add color, two for breaking pencil points here. It's all right. But the transformation that happens, the visual weight changes of these flourishes, and they look fine just white on dark paper, but when you start to add a little bit of color, they really pop, they really come to life. So I'm just popping through with a little bit of green at the base, and that makes these wheat flourishes look like a little floral element. All right, I'm just going to brush on to the back of my pen point a little bit of this. This is Schmincke Gold Watercolor, and it is a beautiful product to use. So I'm brushing that on to sort of an ink-like consistency. I'm going to take a couple of test strokes. Not bad. Okay. And this is a shadow stroke. A shadow stroke simply goes next to one of your larger cartouche strokes, or it can meander in and around the rest of your design just to add a little bit of sparkle and a little bit of glow to your piece. Anybody who is a calligrapher usually has some metallic inks or sparkly things nearby that you can add to your flourish to give it a little bit more joy, I guess, just a little bit more flair. So that's about enough. You don't want to overdo, and again, for me, that's always difficult to stop. And I'm just going to end with a little bit of the Sakura Jelly Roll pen. The color is Clear Stardust, and I'm just going to throw in a couple of little sparkle pieces on the end of this flourish. And there you have it. Ooh, centers are empty. Usually I put some Austrian crystal in there, something really sparkly, but we're just going to put the Sakura Jelly Roll pen in there. But there you go with your little offhand flourish. Some delicate florals, nice and springy, nice and bright and vibrant. So thank you for watching this little spring flourishing cartouche. I hope that you give it a try. Don't think that this is too difficult. Even a few little sprays of rosebuds and wheat flourishes around some of your calligraphy will add just an extra little touch of flair. You can email me at any time at heather@heathervictoriaheld.com, and I'll be happy to point you in the right direction for your flourishing. Thanks for joining.